Hold on tight for the next hour. You're entering into a place, a zone called the alternative to the alternative media. It's a place, a special place where even truth seekers fear to tread.
All right, people, let's move like we've got a purpose. Affirmative.
Okay, Greg Anthony here, and I am so glad you're back on this Tuesday, June 27th, 2017 day on our calendar. And what a show I have for you today. But before I start, let me tell you to go to my website at arcticbeacon.com and press that donate button, because I'm running a pledge drive the next couple of months to see if I can keep this show on the air, as every couple of years we run into financial difficulties since this show, well, how do I put it? Advertisers just run from the truth. So anyway, yesterday I played an old interview, and I had a good introduction with Phil Jayhan, a 9/11 researcher. And we went back and looked at 9/11, and then I made some comments about how really now people have there's so much going on, people have forgotten about it. But anyway, before I do that, I was thinking of a friend of mine who died in 2006, and he's from my hometown. Boy, Phil Jayhan's from my hometown of Chicago, and Sherman Skolnick, the old judge buster, was from Chicago as well. And boy, did I have an opportunity before he passed away to speak to him so many times on the phone, and it always was late at night because he worked late at night. Now, Sherman was handicapped, and boy, his mind wasn't handicapped though. And I'll tell you what, he was sharp right until the very last day. And I wanted to remember Sherman and his fight to warn against Americans about Vatican corruption, as it seems to be almost accepted these days. Well, you can't do anything about it. But Sherman was an interesting fellow, and I remember even talking to him, late hours at night, and boy, his first case was involved. I remember he was not a lawyer, but man, better than most of them. He brought down Governor Otto Kerner and put him behind bars for fraud. It was interesting. A case that then he became known as the Judge Buster because of getting involved with all these fraudulent judges and calling them out and finding. He was an avid researcher. And I'm telling you, this is before the internet. He used to be in that courthouse, in the libraries, I'd say 24 hours a day almost. But anyway, some of the things he brought out was unbelievable regarding fraud and injustice in our judiciary system at the highest levels. Now, I said this in 2007. I said before Sherman Skolnick's untimely passing in 2006, he was right on the money, and I'll tell you that, about the Vatican and their Jesuit enforcers, warning Americans about papal inquisitions coming to the United States. He passed away on May 22nd, 2006. And like I said, before he did, we had many late-night conversations about Vatican infiltration in U.S. foreign and domestic policy. And no joke, folks, he was a fact-oriented person. He always backed up everything he said with fact. Now, about 2 weeks before he passed, I remember him saying in one of our conversations, and I basically remembered exactly what he said, so I wrote it down. He said, the papacy and the criminals in the U.S. government are working hand in glove, especially in the judiciary and the Federal Reserve banking system. Did you know the Jesuits run Bank of America and their partners in the Japanese mafia? Now, he said this in quite a matter-of-fact style. But remember, if you want to get it right, he said, if you want to figure out their game, always look left when the facts in the corrupt press tell you to look right. That's why I work at night, so I can read the morning propaganda before it hits the newsstands. As many of you already know, and I said this, I was thinking about Sherman, Skolnick began investigating, and many who don't know, judicial corruption in my hometown of Chicago in the 60s. In the old days, he was hated by Mayor Daley and the Cook County judges as he put an Illinois Supreme Court justice behind bars, as well as former Governor Otto Kerner. Every day from his Southside bungalow, Sherman investigated tirelessly with a never-ending enthusiasm, despite being handicapped from childhood polio, trying to wake up Americans to the satanic partnership between the Vatican, mafia, and world leaders. Now, people ask me, why did Sherman start this? How did he get involved in this? Well, when he was a young man, he watched his parents lose their home because of a fraudulent ruling and a judge who was in the pocket of the real estate companies. Sherman then vowed to get to the truth and to research these corrupt judges in Chicago. He started there. Now, here's a two-part series he was still working on at the time of his death about Jesuit and Vatican corruption. And I'm going to tell you, he's going to remind you a couple facts about two popes. And let's listen to what he had to say, because he had a very, you know his writing when you saw it, very matter of fact, to the point, didn't waste words. And here's what he wrote. He was writing this at his death. Having financial hang-ups, the spy-riddled, oil-soaked, heavily tax-cheating monopoly press cannot bring you a balanced view of any subject. If you are well informed, you certainly know that. So, some will like what they read here, others will not. Before he became Pope, he was a papal nuncio in Berlin. Some contend he was supportive of the rise of Adolf Hitler. For some years before, during, and after World War II, he was Pope Pius XII. Some authors accused him of being pro-Nazi. The deputy, and this was in the book The Deputy by Rolf H-O-C-H-H-U-T-H, Hitler's Pope, and the Secret History of Pius XII by John Cornwell, 1999, that was published. It's beyond dispute, after World War II, Pius assisted wanted war criminal Nazis to escape down the rat lines to the U.S., South America, and Croatia. And that was in an article or book, Aftermath, by Ladislas Farago. As a young man, he was a theater expert, now an actor. We move on. During his later career, this is another pope now, he was just acting as well. During World War II, he held a position in a facility of IG Farben, the Nazi poison gas factory, part of a chemical cartel. For background, the Crime and Punishment of IG Farben by Joseph Borkin. Karol Wojtyla, Pope John Paul II, was the sort of chief assistant to the Bishop of Krakow, who, being pro-Nazi, controlled fellow Poles with an iron fist and kept them submissive and docile for the benefit of the German occupation forces. Later, far too many Poles claimed they knew nothing of the roundup of the Jews from the ghettos and transporting them to concentration camps for slave labor for IG Farben. Millions and millions of Jews, labor leaders, and other enemies of the state were worked to death while being starved. Elderly and disabled Jews were quickly disposed of. They were of no use to the Nazi war factories. Most Poles later either denied knowing of this when it was happening or claimed they did not participate in the crimes against humanity. Presumably, Wojtyla took the same position as his fellow Poles. In his later career, did anyone in the monopoly press ever dare ask him about this? Then there's the story of another one. In 1978, in their secret conclave, the cardinals selected another Italian to be Pope, John Paul I. But soon it became evident, from a geopolitical and religious standpoint, they most likely made the wrong selection. He soon enough let it be known that he was for modifying the Vatican position of absolute prohibition for Catholics to use birth control. In simple terms, he was against birthing more children than a couple could financially take care of. It was a reasonable, humane position to non-Catholics. Furthermore, he was determined to put an end to the traditional Sicilian and Italian mafia jointly with certain corrupt archbishops and the American CIA, and using the Vatican Bank as money laundering for stolen gold treasures, dope money, illicit weapons deals, assassination funds, and superior counterfeit currency dealings, among other dirty, bloody business of the Vatican. Some Italian editors dared demand that John Paul I first do something about the Continental Bank of Chicago, the majority owners jointly being the Vatican and the Queen of England. The bank, some Italian editors stated, was a laundry for the mafia. As we dared point out publicly, the chief judge of the Chicago Federal Appeals Court, Walter Cummings Jr., was a man of trust for the Vatican and held a large block of shares as nominee and frontman for the Pope. Judge Cummings, a banker judge, did not disqualify himself when his Continental Bank and their major clients were litigants in his tribunal. Guess who won in his cricket court? As predicted accurately by Sherman Skolnick, Continental Bank collapsed in 1984 and was taken over by the Bank of America, owned jointly by the Jesuits and the Japanese underworld, the Yakusa. 33 days after taking office, Pope John Paul I was poisoned with a cup of tea. It was a symbolic warning and death warrant by the Freemasons, the Jesuits, and Opus Dei, the super-fascist, super-secret group. By 2005, Opus Dei, occupying their own large building in New York City. He said this to me. I remember he said, there's more details of the plot against John Paul I in the book God's Name by David Yallop. Thereafter, the Vatican secret conclave of cardinals put together a scheme with the urging of the American CIA to topple the Soviet government. To understand the rationale, you have to have a good understanding of history. The Anglo-American aristocracy financed the rise of the Nazis and Adolf Hitler as a bulwark against the Soviets. In the beginning, the Prussian-German aristocracy was so reluctant to finance Hitler. And see this, folks, Who Financed Hitler by Susan Poole. With his background with the pro-Nazi Polish Bishop of Krakow, Wojtyla was a suitable and forceful anti-communist. But he lacked humanity for Italians. In 1979, there was a terrible earthquake in the historically impoverished southern part of Italy. I remember that one, folks. The destitute Italians demanded that John Paul II, the new pontiff, relieve some of their suffering by sending them financial aid from his mafia American CIA-controlled Vatican Bank. The Pope refused. John Paul II kept censored, as best he could through his helpers, Vatican intelligence, of the growing scandal of the international swindle, Michael Sindona, operating through the Vatican Bank and the Vatican-owned Continental Bank of Chicago. Why don't you see this article, a book, St. Peter's Banker, by Luigi Defonso. Starting about 1980, the American CIA, jointly with a deal with the bosses of Time magazine, arranged tremendous secret financing for their paid-for Polish provocateur, Lech Walesa. As a leader of the Polish Solidarity movement, Walesa stirred up the workers at the Lenin shipyards at Nansk. As the Soviets understood it, Pope John Paul II, by his statements and speeches, jointly with Western paid-for provocateur Walesa, was stirring up fellow Poles in rebellion against the Moscow government. To the Soviets, Wojtyla was a rotten intermeddler, considering how many Soviet lives were lost in freeing Poland from the Germans. In May 1981, the deranged supposed left-wing Turk was grabbed after reportedly being the lone assassin, attempting to kill John Paul II by shooting him in the abdomen right in Vatican Square. Now, folks, I was right there for that one and went to the scene, I remember, as a journalist. Thereafter, two opposing spy shops released supposed details that the other side instigated the would-be assassin. The American CIA planted a flood of apparently phony details that the Bulgarian secret police were accomplices of the Turk in Italy and maybe even right in Vatican Square. Various international inquiries tended to show the CIA's stories had no basis. On the other hand, the Soviets planted stories that seemed to have legs. The Soviets made a compelling case. Boy, you can see how this stuff really gets, how they really set this up and give you the wrong information. On the other hand, the Soviets planted stories that seemed to have legs. The Soviets made a compelling case that the supposed deranged Turk was part of a right-wing military group in Turkey, financed by the American CIA. These two versions tended to cancel each other out. Left unanswered were questions that the Polish Solidarity movement was reportedly not receiving the funding promised by the West. So wounding Wojtyla right on the grounds of the Vatican was perceived by savvy folks as a way of reminding the West to send more money to the Solidarity movement, or maybe it was just a leftover warning for the Pope to be sure to keep covered up the Sindona scandal. After all, some claim Sindona's main efforts in accounting were to whisk huge Italian business funds out of Italy to escape the tax collectors. Or wounding the Pope was a way for the southern Italians and the Sicilians to remind the pontiff not to be so stingy refusing earthquake relief funds in 1979. Compare the following with the position of the murdered Pope John Paul I regarding possibly modifying the church position on birth control. When Pope John Paul II visited Mexico, implicit in his statements was that he was urging Mexicans to go full speed ahead in fathering children. Yet Mexico City, for example, is overpopulated with more than 32 million inhabitants. The authorities have no funds left for sanitation, so the streets in many poor sections become the toilet and dumping grounds. It makes for a terribly unhealthy situation. The Pope offered no remedy, only being interested in more members for his church. Over a number of years, Pope John Paul II made apologies for various historical crimes of his church. For example, in 1492, Columbus landed in the New World. Thereafter, the Catholic Church committed terrible crimes against the natives of Mexico and Central America and black and other slaves. 500 years later, in 1992, Pope John Paul II visited Central America and made apologies for crimes of 500 years previous. To some, it was an idle gesture. And the Pope visited the memorial to the Holocaust in Israel and made apologies there. To some, it was an idle, worthless ceremony. Seldom mentioned in Pope John Paul II's efforts to topple the Soviet Union was the more important purpose of the Vatican. That is to smash, if possible, the Eastern Orthodox Church, a competitor, if not enemy of the Vatican, for more than 1,000 years. Now, some people conveniently forgot a few things, such as popes up to the beginning of the 19th century threatened to throw members of the church, excommunicate them, for daring to say the earth is not flat. That is, the Vatican was the headquarters of the Flat Earth Committee. Also, did any pope ever urge scientific progress in medicines, healthcare, transportation, or communications? Or urge progress in labor-saving machinery so human beings would not be just above a pack of animals? Why does it seem the popes have their church in full reverse gear instead of forward and progressive? So anyway, that's one thing he was working on. He gave me a part 2, and I'm going to read that to you tomorrow. So come back to the show tomorrow. I'm going to switch gears now and go back to start playing that interview, finish up the show, first segment here, and then into the second segment of the interview with that was the Phil Jayhan, the interview I did in 2007 regarding 9/11. He's an avid researcher. You can still get him on the web. And he's one of the truth tellers in this, amongst so many COINTEL operatives claiming to want 9/11 truth, but actually working for the other side. Here we go.
The investigative journal, and if you missed it, Alex Jones called in. I mean, boy, I'll tell you, that's unusual, defending the Vatican. And anyway, maybe he'll call back again, and we can talk. But it's that, Phil, it's that in-your-face kind of journalism or news broadcasting or talk radio broadcasting he brings to the alternative media. It's that in-your-face lack of intelligent thinking, not allowing people to speak. I mean, carrying on a conversation where intelligent minds get together to figure out the problem. His idea is to control a discussion and lead people into a direction he believes is, what he's paid to do. And that's my point. And I believe, Phil, that we have little or no chance of waking up sufficient numbers of Americans to make a difference as to the great dangers of the republic we are facing today, unless we do this, unless we uncover the secret, semi-secret societies such as the Jesuits, Knights of Malta, Knights of Columbus, high levels, the high levels there, along with the high levels of Freemasonry. And all of these must be removed from the American shores. And that means get rid of every Jesuit on the planet here in America, just like they've been removed 83 other times in the course of history. But it's not only the Jesuits and the Knights of Malta who must be exposed, it's the entire apparatus of Papal Rome that resides in the USA, undermining our liberties and working overtime for our destruction. The history, now here's things that Jones will never talk about, and Guido Lorenz and the rest of these people, because they forget the history of 3 secret meetings, the Congress of Vienna in 1814 and 15 in Verona, Italy, in 1822 in Chieri, Italy, in 1825, where America's destruction was planned by European monarchs at the urgings and the blessings of the papacy. Nothing has changed today. That is constant in Rome canon law. And I've had priests on my show who have left the church who say that nothing has changed. And we can talk about the doctrines of Catholicism and the Vatican, and they have not changed one bit. They want to destroy freedom in this country. And I wanted to ask you, you did a nice analysis of the government, the way the Vatican is organized as compared to the old Roman government of Rome. Tell us about that.
Yeah, that's exactly where I wanted to start off for a lot of, because I know I'm sure a lot of listeners here, haven't heard this before. And, you and I, if this is new to somebody, the first thing that they're going to think is, whoa, this is way out there in outer space. The Pope is a Christian, blah, blah, blah. He might, and they're going to have a lot of misconceptions, and they might not even be able to, listen to some of the things that we're saying without a proper foundation. So let's go back to the beginnings. Let's go back to, we're not going to go way back to the origins, but we're going to go back to the beginnings of, the Catholic Church. If you look in the history books, if you Google this, if you look for the fall of Rome, you'll come up with a couple different dates, and you'll come up with no definitive, aftermath of Rome. You come with no definitive dates, and you really, after a lot of research, you'll find that Rome never actually fell. Rome, with the Emperor Constantine, Caesar Constantine, was, he basically faked, his conversion to Christianity. And before this, we have to understand that Rome was all about paganism. It was all about Mithraism. They worshipped, the gods. They worshipped Nimrod, Semiramis, the god Jupiter, Thor, Hercules, and all these different gods that they had. And it was the same god that the Greek Empire had before them. And these gods they would do sacrifice to. They would get power from these gods, to war and to make war and to take plunder through war. And one of the things after Christ and his resurrection was the birth of the Christian Church. Part of that was in Rome, the Roman Empire. Part of it was outside of that empire, but what they found is they persecuted Christians, time after time after time, and every time that they persecuted Christians, over about a 300-year period, they found that Christians grew in number. They would kill, 400,000, and 700,000 would pop up. They'd go and whack another 500,000, and 1.2 million would pop up. They'd whack 200,000, 300,000 would pop up. They finally decided that if they kept going like that they were going to lose. So Constantine, very shrewdly, faked his conversion to Christianity. He was the last Roman Caesar, and he was the first Roman Catholic pontiff.
Okay, so we're going to take a break here in 2017, and I promise right after we come back, we'll get right back to that interview. A lot about the popes today, so don't miss the second half. Don't turn it away, and don't forget to go to my website, arcticbeacon.com, and hit that donate button, because you got to get information like this out, don't you? And there aren't many people that are doing it. Back in 3 minutes on the Investigative Journal.
Visit crosstheborder.org, CROSS, crosstheborder.org, to get your print, EPUB, or PDF version of Nicholas Arthur's new book titled When the Third Temple is Built. That's crosstheborder.org. When it comes to prophecy today, much of the evangelical Christian world has their eyes on Israel, waiting and watching to see when the third temple will begin to be built. The plans are drawn. The Jewish people are eager. Most evangelical Christians today believe that the rapture will happen before the third temple is built. Hi, I'm Michael Eugene. I was taught that Daniel's 70th week was in the future. Is that really what the Bible teaches? Have we searched the scriptures and found this to be true? Why is it so important for a re-established Israel to build a third temple in Jerusalem? Is it necessary to build a temple on the same location already occupied by the Dome of the Rock? Is it necessary for sacrifices to take place in the temple on Temple Mount? Is there really a rapture followed by 7 years of tribulation? What is the New Testament temple? Can we identify history and prophecy? Who is the first beast in Revelation chapter 13? Who are the 7 kings in Revelation 17? I have asked all these questions, and I have found Nicholas Arthur's new book, When the Third Temple is Built, answers all these questions and more using Scripture to interpret Scripture. The Bible says that no prophecy of Scripture is of any private interpretation. Nicholas shows us in his new book, When the Third Temple is Built, how the Bible interprets prophecy and not man's private interpretation. Visit crosstheborder.org, C-R-O-S-S, crosstheborder.org to get your print, EPUB, or PDF version of Nicholas Arthur's new book titled When the Third Temple is Built. That's crosstheborder.org.
The program you are listening to is 100% sponsored by you, the listener, on this First Amendment Rights Media channel. You will notice that there are few commercials on this radio network. There's a good reason for that. Corporate advertising dollars come with strings that limit program content. So without your help, these programs cannot continue on internet or our several affiliates. If you benefit by the educational law programs, we ask you to give. If you are admonished or nurtured by the Bible and ministry programs, we ask you to give. If some voice a cause that you are passionate about, we ask you to give. If you believe in any of these, we ask you to support them as you would a missionary on a continual basis, as if giving a tithe for missionary radio. These programs are not commercially viable and must be supported by those faithful to the cause of truth. Look for the button to sponsor your favorite programs at our listen and schedule pages on the internet. Then, when you subscribe, we will send you the last quarterly MP3 CD of that program immediately, and continue to do so with each new quarter. We will also give you unlimited archive access to all of our programs. We're asking you to give much less than a tithe, so that you may also send support directly to a particular program host, cause, and anywhere else the Spirit may lead you. Do all to the glory of our God and Creator, for His holy nation, the only kingdom that will last forever. Thank you for listening.
The following program is labeled dangerous and off limits by the supreme Jesuit command. But stand tall, people. Listen up, and you may just learn something.
Oh, dear Lord Jesus, this ain't happening, man. This can't be happening, man. This ain't happening.
Okay, that went by fast at 3 minutes. Boy, it doesn't radio. You know, you just have enough time to do a couple things, and you're right back on the air here on the Investigative Journal. What are you doing on this Tuesday evening, America? And what part of the country are you listening from? Let me know at gregbeacon@gmail.com. And also, if you want to have any topics explored on this show, let me know at the same email. And also, go to my website at arcticbeacon.com, arcticbeacon.com. Hit that donate button as we're running a pledge drive for the next couple months, and I need your support. Okay, let's get back to, we're back in the old Roman Empire with Phil Jayhan on the Investigative Journal.
So he, in a process, started a process which lasted about 120 years of, Christianizing, the Roman Empire. The hierarchy of the Roman Empire, now called the Roman Church. I'm going to, kind of go over this material. It's in a post of mine on my forums. But Vatican City is a landlocked state within the city of Rome, Italy. It is governed by the Bishop of Rome, called the Pope. It is the smallest sovereign state in the world. It is a nation. Caesar Constantine began the corporate takeover by renaming all the old Roman offices. This evolution of name changing still occurs. This name changing allows a person or an organization to hide their tracks of origin. So the Roman Empire offices in their modern names. The Roman Empire was called the Imperium Romanum, and it was renamed to be the Roman Catholic Church. The Curia of Rome, which was the legal body of senators, had a slight name change to the Curia, the legal body of cardinals. So the senators were renamed cardinals. The Roman Emperor was renamed the Roman Pope, head of all church and state affairs, or he held the office of Pontifex Maximus, or the Supreme Pontiff. So civil and government matters of state were renamed to be extraordinary affairs, matters of civil state government. Religious orders matters were renamed to be church ecclesiastical matters. The Roman College of Senators was renamed the College of Cardinals. You see where this is going. For each office and agency of the Roman Empire, they came up with a corresponding, very similar name. The Roman governors were renamed archbishops. They were in charge of large Roman territories. Roman senators with no territory were renamed to be bishops under the Code of Canon Law in 376. A large Roman province was renamed archdiocese. The small Roman territories were renamed dioceses. The Vestal Virgins were renamed nuns. So what you see is they basically just morphed the Roman government to become the Holy Roman Church as we know it. And, slow period of morphing and Christianizing the empire, they were able to create basically another fascist state. It was not the first one, but they combined religion with state, and therefore they became the gatekeepers of all the doctrine and dogma of the Christian church and the last word of the scriptures. One of the things that the Code of Canon Law, says, they have their own constitution, and it's called the Code of Canon Law. But one of the things that they boldly say, and it's reiterated throughout the whole document, is that the Pope, who's called the First See, he's judged by no man. And I'm looking for this. There's 2 or 3 verses to this right now, and I'm looking at here. I got it. It's the Code of Canon Law 1404. The First See is judged by no one. Canon Law 1405, Section 1. It is solely the right of the Roman Pontiff himself to judge in the cases mentioned in Canon Law 1401. He also judges those who hold the highest civil office of the state. Remember that the Caesar was head of all of the Roman Empire. In the Roman Empire, you had different countries like Germania, Britannia. You had, Bohemia. You had Portugal. You had Gaul, which was, later became named Spain. And, so these territories had their own names, and, the Supreme Pontiff would be head of all the governors in these different territories of Rome. Now, it's the same thing today, except the Supreme, he's called the Pope, and, the Pope is in charge of all the archbishops. The archbishops are the ones who rule and, reign over the countries from the shadows, from the sidelines. Most people in America, they realize that, whether we get Kerry or whether we get Bush, whether we have a Republican or a Democrat, most Americans, to some extent realize that there's somebody behind the president that really pulls the strings, that there's another power behind the presidency that's co-opting that power. And this is the secret societies that we're talking about. In commercial, John F. Kennedy, that's one of my favorite speeches by John F. Kennedy, because he talks about the way that they subvert nations. They subvert and infiltrate rather than invade. And when you realize that this is how that they work, they move into a country that they have no power over, that they have no power base in, and they just slowly take over. these secret societies. They elevate these people, to be, head of corporations and universities, and then, hopefully, some of these are going to, filter up into government. And once they get people in power positions, those people are able to appoint other people that's part of their own secret society into other positions. So,
right, and to connect, and people would then say, well, why would the Vatican be at the top of the food chain here? How do they operate? What is their motive? And I think you have to look at that from both a spiritual and a secular point of view, understanding their satanic preferences, and then understanding how their tentacles have reached out throughout the world to create fascist states. Their connections in concordance with Hitler, their connections in concordance with Mussolini, Stalin. And basically what this has done is getting a mixture of the church and state, using this kind of power the Vatican wields as far as hiding behind God and Jesus, but using their tentacles to gain massive amounts of money and power. And what they've done in our country, according to people like President John Adams, Abraham Lincoln, Lafayette, Dostoevsky,
Samuel Morse, Andrew Jackson, Buchanan, Harrison, Lincoln, Woodrow Wilson, close to his death, basically, was sorry for what he had done to America. He confessed as much. Roosevelt was a 33rd degree Mason, and a lot of other presidents are Masons. Masonry, although a lot of Masons might not know it, not believe it, Masonry is controlled behind the scenes by the Vatican. That's the step above. That's what controls them. Skull and Bone Society, a small secret society, a small little church of the big mother church, that's controlled by the Vatican. The Jesuits, the Dominicans, the Bilderbergers, the Rothschilds, the richest, most powerful international bankers in the world are actually the chief financial officers for the Vatican, and their family has been the chief financial officers for the Vatican for over 200 years now.
Right. And so they take a foothold in our country, and quotes from some of these people have said, never in the history of our country, this was made in 1914, have the Vatican and the Jesuits been more powerful in America, and that you see that today. For example, Henry Kissinger, becomes a papal, advisor. You see the close connections, presidents sitting at the feet of dead popes. Never in the history has that happened.
Tony Blair just, got out of office, became, a Catholic within 30 days. They're crowning Prince Philip to be, and they just made a statue of Prince Philip, and they're going to give him the title, and I'm not making this up. I'm not making this up, folks. Prince Philip is going to become Savior of the world. Mm-hmm. No kidding. Savior of the world. Yeah. Prince Philip, Tony Blair. So you can see that the Anglican spinoff of Britannia, which was part of the Protestant Reformation, has been crushed, through infiltration and subversion. You can see that Anglican spinoff from Rome, where they basically held the same religion. They didn't really change a lot of the doctrine, a lot of the false, evil things that they worship. They spun off. They just wanted to control it themselves. And that was back in the 1500s. And now that's been undone, by the Vatican. Maggie Thatcher back in, I think it was 81 or 83 that she signed the Concordant with Rome.
Yeah, and then Ronald Reagan follows suit in 84, and then reinstitutes diplomatic relations and signs the Concordant with the Vatican.
Well, tell people where the diplomatic relations were cut off, because that'll help people understand.
They were cut off because back when Abraham Lincoln was killed, the Vatican and the Jesuit order were involved in putting together the hit team, and the legislators back then knew that. In fact, one of the killers in the hit team was hidden in the Vatican. There was a trial here, and 4 of them were hung, and 8 were found to be involved with Mary Surratt's house and her brother, Mr. Surratt, and the Jesuits were involved in planning this assassination of Lincoln. So what happens then, is the American government decides to break off diplomatic relations with the Vatican, and yet, for obvious reasons. They're meddling in our country. They want to get rid of democracy, so they help the Confederacy. They get monarchs in England monarchs in Europe to back them.
Yeah, I think it'll help people here to understand that during the Civil War, the Pope made open declarations, which were printed in newspapers throughout Europe, mostly in Ireland, where a lot of the Roman Catholics, had the biggest power base, and he told, people to come to America, so that they could help subvert America for the Pope. And then at the same time, he was telling people, and this was in newspapers, he was telling Roman Catholics that were, fighting in the Union Army to desert. Yeah, and they were the largest deserters in the Civil War. There was like 110 or 130,000, Roman Catholics that, because of what the Pope was commanding them to do, they did. They left the Union Army, and countless tens of thousands more lives were wasted because of this, and the war prolonged because the Pope was meddling in the affairs of this country, trying to make it stay divided, or if it was going to be a united country, they wanted to have total control, either and or.
Right, and they're no friends of democracy. Ever since then, they've been trying to infiltrate and to gain control of our government. And I think if we look at the outward signs of it, look at 10% of our Senate and our Congress are Jesuit trained at this moment. If you look at the heads of most of our military, the military, they're all Jesuit trained. If you look at our executive branch, many of them Jesuit trained.
Well, let's look at the Supreme Court for a second, because, and let's not forget that the Vatican state is a nation. Okay, 5 of the Supreme Court justices that are on the Supreme Court now are Roman Catholics.
Right.
Okay, how would we feel if 5 of these people, were Chinese? That they held, or Buddhist Chinese. Would we trust such a court?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, good point. And I don't trust them now, because basically they're loyal to the establishing of this one world government under the guise of democracy. They have ripped apart the Constitution since 9/11. It's obvious what they're doing. We have a ignorant dictator taking over our presidency who talks more like Hitler than anybody I've ever heard. He's just another. It's a really amazing that people don't put this together, because what happens is you have this power of church and state growing, melding together, and that is basically the cup of poison that will destroy this.
Well, yeah, that's fascism. When you have the church and the state, blend together, that's fascism. And, a worse fascism, or a fascist totalitarianism, is when the church, the state, and business, corporations unite. That's when you have total, absolute tyranny.
And I have something on my website, you'd love this, it's called Pope and His Satanist Pals, but this person named Shani Ingram sent this to me and said, check out the Pope and his pals giving Masonic handshakes. All these people are high-level Freemason Satanists. If there's a separation between church and state, why are all these leaders from each nation having private audiences with Benedict? People need to wake up seriously, because this is the power source of the New World Order, along with the string pulling of the Jesuits and its general, Father Hans Kolbenbach. And then he goes and he gives me all these pictures of all these people, all these leaders of countries. Let's go through some of them. Blair, the leader of Bulgaria. We got Hugo Chavez in Venezuela, Luxembourg, Egypt, Lebanon, Poland, Montenegro. It goes on and on and on. And every one of these pictures, they're meeting the Pope in a private audience, and you can see him doing Masonic handshakes.
Yeah, it's not hard to see. The Pope himself, he wears Dagon's mitre, which is straight out of the mystery religions of Babylon.
Okay, I'm going to break in here for a minute. I had to. I was listening bringing back old memories. And you can imagine when me and Phil used to get together off the air, and we spent a lot of time together, because I said he helped me with a couple of my restaurants. And so, boy, I'll tell you, we had some fiery conversations, and he's quite a researcher, and I recommend you go look at his work regarding 9/11. He's still at it, one of the few people. He's found out some incredible things that need to be looked at. Back to Phil.
Where they worship Semiramis and Nimrod. Nimrod, claimed to be the first resurrection, after he was murdered, by his wife and mother, Semiramis. Some know her as Ashtoreth, Aphrodite. It's all the same person. And, check out some of these quotations from the Jesuit order. This is John Adams, the second president of the United States. My history of the Jesuits is not eloquently written, but it is supported by unquestionable authorities and is very particular and very horrible. The Jesuit order's restoration in 1814 by Pope Pius the Seventh, is indeed a step toward darkness, cruelty, despotism, and death. I do not like the appearance of the Jesuits. If ever there was a body of men who merited eternal damnation on earth and in hell, it is the Society of Ignatius de Loyola, or the Illuminati. Marquis de Lafayette, he was a French statesman and general. He served in the American Continental Army under the command of George Washington during the American Revolutionary War. Said, "It is my opinion that if the liberties of this country, the United States of America, are destroyed, it will be by the subtlety of the Roman Catholic Jesuit priests. But they are the most crafty, dangerous enemies to civil and religious liberty. They have instigated most, if not all, the wars of Europe." Abraham,
and they're fueling the fires of the wars right now in Iraq, where the soldiers are being killed, over 1 million Iraqis, and it's the beginning of the Pope's new genocide of Muslims, Jews, and American Protestant Christians, and even American Catholics.
Anybody who will not eventually, it's going to get to the point where anybody who will not bow to the Pope, anybody who will not kiss the saliva-crusted ring, okay? Anybody that dares oppose Rome, the doctrines of Rome, are going to be slaughtered.
Yeah.
Let me give you an example. When they started the Inquisition's always gone on in the Roman Empire against Christians. But around the year 1200, they really kind of mechanized the process. Before that, it was kind of like hit and miss. It would be done by whims and spouts of anger by the Supreme Pontiff. But around 1200, they mechanized the process of the Inquisition, and it went on. It never stopped. It's still going on to this day. But for 700 solid years before the loss of the Papal States, they murdered a minimum. This is bare minimum 60 million people. When they went into Bohemia for the Bohemian Inquisition, the first Inquisition in the early 1300s, there was 4.5 million Bohemians. A few short years later, when the Inquisition ended, there was only 800,000 left.
Mm-hmm.
So they murdered 3.7 million Bohemians, okay, just $2.
Okay, we took a break there in 2007. And, boy, I'll tell you what, if when you hear that the Inquisition still goes on, and it does today, if they could kill all those people, 60 million, or 4 million at a crack in Bohemia, do you think they're worried about you living in, Kansas? Or you live in Simi Valley, California? Or you live in Sacramento? You think they're worried about that? Man, all they want to do is have control, and the less people around, the better. So I'll tell you, look out, America, because we've been here for a couple hundred years, and now the target is on America's back, and you know who the enemy is. And right now, if you don't start researching it, then, you become kind of complicit in the whole thing too. Okay, just a second. I want to get back and finish the last 4 minutes. We're going to go in a second and get back to this interview with Phil. Okay, like I said, here we go.
hour, the Investigative Journal. I'm talking with Phil Jayhan. We're going to get back to Phil in just one moment and continue this discussion about the Inquisitions and the upcoming Inquisition in America. But I did get a note that just today, Pope Benedict XVI plans to travel to the United States in the spring to address the United Nations. I believe it's some anniversary or something, but other possible U.S. stops haven't yet been confirmed, the Vatican said through its spokesman today. Benedict accepted the invitation from the UN Secretary General. U.S. bishops and the Vatican have also been discussing other possible stops, and those will include Boston, Baltimore, Philadelphia, and Washington. However, Reverend Federico Lombardi, the Vatican spokesman, said that only the spring visit to the UN has been confirmed. However, he's expected to go to these other cities. So here's just another, what the heck, we got a pope coming to the UN. I mean, come on, folks. What's going on? I mean, it's just so amazing to me. So I just wanted to bring that up. And tomorrow on my show, I'm going to have Leo Zagami from Italy on
about a worldwide, monolithic, ruthless conspiracy. Everybody needs to realize that John F. Kennedy was reading from a carefully prepared speech. He was not talking off the cuff. All these were carefully prepared words, and they had, he had intentions for these words for people to understand what he was saying. He couldn't come right out and say what he wanted to, or else he would have just wiped him. He's walking a fine line. He already knew he crossed it, but he's given basically an open, cryptic message.
Which means the Vatican's involved. The Pope is not going to control me, and that was his demise.
Well, yeah, that, printing money, I mean, he disobeyed, his superiors. He was a bad Illuminati child. He was one of them who would not go, he was an honest to God patriot. He would not sell his country down the road, is what it comes down to. Here's a quote from Bonaparte, Napoleon Bonaparte, who's a tyrant in his own, stead, but, apart from that,
I may come back. We got about 30 seconds, and we'll come. I got more of this interview, and then Sherman Skolnick tomorrow, so why don't we continue it? But it's interesting, all these things we've been talking about for a decade or so are coming to a head now, and so many more people understand it, but yet, boy, I'll tell you, there's so many more that are just not going to open their ears to the truth. But I hope you will, and if you do, come back tomorrow on the Investigative Journal. See you tomorrow.
The book of Revelation says, the spirit of prophecy is the testimony of Jesus Christ. This is at the very heart of FirstAmendmentRadio.com. In that spirit, we have created the Prophecy Reality News app for all of your mobile devices, streaming First Amendment Radio 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Available for your Apple, Android device, and smartphone, absolutely free. Get the Prophecy Reality News app installed today so you can listen to First Amendment Radio wherever you are. The Prophecy.
Since the beginning of time, kings have sought it, nations have fought for it. It has been traded, it has been borrowed, it has been purchased, it has been stolen. There's a reason for it. To secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and to our posterity. Invest with the security of gold and silver. Call Discount Gold and Silver Trading at 1-800-375-4188 or visit discountgoldandsilvertrading.net. Listen to Financial Survival with your host Melody Cedarstrom right here on FirstAmendmentRadio.com at 4 p.m. Eastern or 1 p.m. Pacific Time. Visit discountgoldandsilvertrading.net or call Discount Gold and Silver Trading at 1-800-375-4188. Toll free 1-800-375-4188.